The photographer asked everyone in the Mercer family to step forward for the official portrait, and I stood up instinctively before my son-in-law. Brent Mercer's hand came down softly on my shoulder. "Maybe just immediate family for this one, Rosalie," he said. Calm, almost gentle, the way he said everything. And I looked toward my daughter Audra. She was adjusting the collar of baby Ivy's dress, not meeting my eyes. Brent's mother, Lavinia Mercer, was already moving smoothly into frame, pearl earrings catching the light in the hotel event room they'd rented for Ivy's naming ceremony. I sat back down at my assigned table, third row, nearest the door, and pressed my hands together on my lap so no one would see them shake. On the chair beside me sat a cloth bag I'd carried in that morning. Inside was a quilt I had spent 5 months making. 14 of my late husband Alfred's flannel shirts, cut into squares and stitched together by hand, each seam pressed flat on my kitchen table in Victoria while the winter rain came down outside. I had wanted to wrap Ivy in it myself. I had imagined the moment so many times I could have described it in my sleep. Instead, I sat in the third row and watched Lavinia Mercer drape a cashmere blanket, cream-colored, monogrammed in gold thread, around my granddaughter while the photographer clicked and my daughter smiled for the camera. If this story touches something in you, I hope you'll tell me in the comments. Have you ever given everything to someone who eventually looked straight through you? I read every single comment, because sometimes the most important thing is just knowing someone else understands. And if you're new here, please subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there right now. I read them all. People who see me now, walking the seawall in James Bay in the morning, or at the market on Cook Street, they see a woman who seems settled. 63 years old, silver hair, good coat. They don't see the years I worked double shifts in the cardiac unit at Royal Jubilee, so that Audra would never feel the exact shape of what we didn't have. They don't see the night my husband Alfred died of a stroke when Audra was 11, and the way she stood in the hospital hallway afterward, with her arms at her sides, not knowing how to cry yet, not knowing I was asking myself the same question she was. What happens to us now? That question became the engine of the next 20 years. My name is Rosalie Dunmore. I went back to full-time nursing within weeks of Alfred's funeral. Double shifts, weekends, holidays, whatever the ward needed. I made casseroles on Sunday evenings and left instructions on the counter and told myself that a mother who provided was still a good mother, even when providing meant leaving before her daughter was awake. There were nights I came home at 2 a.m. and stood in Audra's doorway just to listen to her breathe, not because I was frightened, because I needed to remember why I was tired. We were close the way people become close when there are only 2 of them. Friday evenings we ordered Thai food and watched old films. Audra used to fold laundry with me on Sundays and talk about everything. School, her father, what she wanted her life to look like. She had Alfred's way of going quiet before she said something important. I loved her for that. When she got into nursing school, she chose it herself. I never pushed. I cried harder than she did. I helped her find her first rental near Camison. When she moved to Vancouver for a hospital position, I drove the moving truck. When she told me she was seeing someone named Brent Mercer, a financial consultant she'd met through a colleague, I made myself wait before asking too many questions. He was handsome in a way that photographed well, always put together. At our first dinner he stood when I entered the room, shook my hand and said, "Audra talks about you so much. You must be an extraordinary woman, raising her on your own." I remember thinking, this one knows how to read a room. I didn't know yet whether that was a good sign. The first year, Brent was nearly perfect around me. He called me Rosalie, not Audra's mum. He asked about my patients, my work, Alfred, with what seemed like genuine interest. One Thanksgiving, he stood beside me in the kitchen drying dishes and said quietly that the best thing that had ever happened to Audra was having a mother who showed her what real strength looked like. I held on to that sentence longer than I should have. But there were small things. The way Brent talked about money, as though it were a personality trait. The investment tier restaurant memberships. The careful adjustments whenever Audra mentioned something ordinary. We've actually moved on from that place. Or that's getting a bit dated, isn't it? Once, at Audra's birthday dinner, I wore a blouse I'd always liked. Blue cotton, not expensive, but well made. and Brent looked at it for a moment too long before looking away. Audra noticed. Later in the kitchen, she said softly, "Mum, maybe next time something a little more." She trailed off. I said the blouse was perfectly fine. She changed the subject. After that, the small comments arrived in a steadier rhythm. "Mum, let me take you shopping." "Mum, people in Brent's circles notice presentation." "Mum, maybe don't mention the co-op groceries when we're with his clients. Each one was harmless on its own." Together they carved something out of me I couldn't quite name. When Audra got pregnant, I convinced myself things would even out. Becoming a mother changes a person. It had changed me. I started the quilt the day she told me. 14 of Alfred's flannel shirts, kept folded in a bin at the top of my closet for 12 years because I hadn't been able to let them go. I worked on it every evening at the kitchen table, pressing each seam flat, thinking about what I hoped for Ivy. I imagined the moment I would wrap her in it. I did not imagine Lavinia Mercer, stepping smoothly into every frame while I sat in the third row nearest the door. Lavinia was one of those women who made generosity feel like a transaction. She arrived for Ivy's birth with a designer pram, a monogrammed diaper bag from a Robson Street boutique, and opinions about everything from sleep schedules to which families were worth maintaining relationships with. At the hospital, she positioned herself beside the bassinet whenever I came near and began conversations that required everyone's full attention. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I was not. The naming ceremony was 6 weeks after Ivy came home. A secular celebration with a celebrant in a hotel near the Inner Harbor. Understated and lovely. The kind of thing I would have chosen myself. I brought the quilt in a cloth bag. I had pressed it that morning, folded it carefully, tied a piece of ribbon around it. You already know how the rest of that part goes. The photographer. Brent's hand on my shoulder. "Maybe just immediate family for this one, Rosalie." And Audra, adjusting Ivy's collar, not looking up. I sat back down. I folded my hands. I smiled at nothing in particular, while Lavinia draped her cashmere blanket around my granddaughter and the camera captured every angle of a family I had been edited out of. I drove home on the Pat Bay Highway, with the quilt still in the bag on the passenger seat, and said nothing to anyone. I made tea I didn't drink. And then I called my financial advisor, Monica Tran, and asked her to pull everything that carried my name. Monica had been my advisor for 14 years. Before that, a friend of a colleague. Direct, unhurried, the kind of person who tells you true things even when they're uncomfortable. "Pull all of it," I told her. "Tell me what you actually see." She called me back 2 days later. "Rosalie," she said, and her voice had that particular evenness she uses when she is being careful. "Have you been tracking the household support account?" 3 years earlier, when Audra and Brent moved to Victoria and bought a property in Fernwood, in a market where a modest house cost more than I had earned in 15 years of nursing, I had opened a joint support account. I'd told myself it was a bridge. Temporary. I transferred into it on the 1st of every month. "Not closely," I said. "The withdrawals don't match your contributions. There's a significant gap." She walked me through it. The account had been accessed at an unusual frequency. Transfers out to a secondary investment account I didn't recognize. The amounts were not small, and attached to several of the withdrawal authorizations was a signature that looked something like mine, but wasn't. Not the way I curved the R in Rosalie, not the way I formed the D in Dunmore. "That's not my signature," I said. "No," Monica said. "I didn't think it was." I sat at my kitchen table after we hung up and stared at nothing for a long time. Outside, the hydrangeas I'd planted last spring. The cedar fence Alfred built the year we moved in, repainted twice since then. Everything ordinary and unchanged. Inside me, something shifting, quietly, like ice giving way underfoot. I called my solicitor, Alton Webb, that evening. Alton had handled Alfred's estate and my will update and a property dispute with a neighbor 4 years ago. He was methodical and unhurried, and he listened to everything without interrupting. "Stop all discretionary transfers," he said when I finished. "Tonight, if possible. And Rosalie, I want you to hear me clearly. Doing this is not abandoning Audra. It may be the first honest thing you've done for her in quite some time." That sentence was unkind and accurate, and it kept me awake until nearly 4 in the morning. I sent no transfer, on the 1st of the following month. I sent a registered letter to the strata management company regarding the fees I had been covering. I contacted the financial institution about the irregular authorizations. Each call felt like removing a load-bearing wall and waiting to see what fell. Audra called 4 days later. "Mom, something's wrong with the account." "Yes." The strata office called Brent. He said it was an administrative error. "It isn't an error, Audra." A long pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I've stopped the transfers." The silence that followed had weight to it. Not only surprise, something more complicated, like someone who has been waiting for a consequence and still didn't believe it would actually arrive. "You can't do that," she said. "We have the mortgage, the strata fees, Ivy's." "Audra." I kept my voice even. I was not in a single photograph at Ivy's naming ceremony. Brent asked me to sit back down so his family could stand in the frame. "And you let that happen?" She said nothing. "I made that quilt from your father's shirts," I said. "I carried it in, and I carried it back out again." Silence, then quietly, "Mum, you're making it sound." "I was there," I said. "I don't need you to confirm what I saw." Over the following week, the messages arrived in waves. Texts, voicemails, eventually an email with Brent's careful language threaded through every sentence. Then Brent himself called one evening, voice exactly as smooth as I remembered from that first Thanksgiving. "Rosalie, I want you to know no slight was intended at the ceremony. We were simply managing a great many moving pieces." I said nothing. I think this financial situation is creating unnecessary anxiety for Audra at a very vulnerable time. "Surely you understand. She's a new mother." "And I am her mother," I said. He shifted tones smoothly. Talked about stability, Ivy's well-being, the importance of not allowing emotion to drive financial decisions. And then, near the end of the conversation, perhaps because he had grown comfortable, or because the pressure was making him careless, he said, "Without your continued support, the life we've built here isn't sustainable." The life we've built. I wrote it down on a notepad after we hung up and left it on my kitchen table. Monica came to the house 2 weeks later with printed account statements spread across 3 folders. She walked me through everything she had found. Brent had been cycling money from the household account into a speculative development project in the Fraser Valley, a venture that had been losing money steadily for over a year. He had used the account, and by extension my implied backing, to maintain his professional standing. The fraudulent authorizations bore something close to my signature. Close enough to pass as a quick review. Not close enough to fool anyone who actually knew my handwriting. Alton arrived an hour later. He reviewed the documents without speaking for several minutes. Then he said, "This is potentially criminal. Not a family disagreement. Criminal." My first instinct, even then, was to protect Audra. "Does she know?" I asked. Alton and Monica exchanged a look. "We don't believe she understands the extent of it," Alton said carefully. "But, Rosalie, that doesn't mean she understood nothing." I pressed my palms flat on the table to stop them shaking. That evening I called Audra's old nursing school friend, Cassie Vidal, who had known my daughter since their Camason days, and who I trusted because she never softened things for comfort. I asked her plainly whether she had noticed anything concerning. Cassie was quiet for a moment, then, "Since Brent, she barely returns messages. When I did see her last spring, she seemed different, like she was measuring everything before she said it, watching her own reactions." Another pause. "He told her once, in front of me, that she had an unsophisticated way of talking about money. Said it like a joke. She laughed. But I saw her face first." I thanked Cassie and sat with that for a long time. The legal correspondence went out on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Audra was calling every 40 minutes. I answered once, in the evening, when her voice sounded less furious and more frightened. "Mum, lawyers came to the house." "I know. You don't understand what you've done." "Audra," I said, "do you know how much debt is attached to the Fraser Valley project?" Silence. "Did you authorize withdrawals from the household account in the last 12 months? Her voice, when it came, was very small. "No, Brent handles all of that. He always said I didn't need to understand the details." Something shifted in my chest. Not relief exactly, but close. I asked her to come to the house. She arrived the next afternoon without Brent, which told me everything. No makeup, hair pulled back, ivy in a carrier on her chest, small and warm and entirely unaware. She sat at my kitchen table. I made tea, and I told her everything Monica and Alton had found. She cried in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Not the contained kind, the kind that bypasses all your defenses because the body decides it has no more room. She kept shaking her head, not in disbelief, in grief. Like watching something she had believed in dissolve into something she didn't recognize. I trusted him with everything, she whispered. He said he handled it. He said I didn't need to know the details. I know you trusted him, I said. The naming ceremony. Her voice broke slightly. Mum, I'm so ashamed. I didn't tell her not to be. Love doesn't protect people from accountability. I had learned that the hard way myself, facing in the other direction. He made me embarrassed of ordinary things, she said. Of you, of where we came from. She looked down at Ivy sleeping against her. He always said image was everything, that people judged you constantly and you had to stay ahead of it. I believed him for so long. I know. I stopped seeing what was real. She wiped her face. I stopped seeing you. When Brent arrived at my house 2 weeks later, Alton was already seated at the dining room table. Brent came without warning, knocked hard enough that the door shook, and I opened it to a man who looked nothing like the Thanksgiving dinner version of himself. The blazer was wrinkled. The careful composure was gone. He had the look of someone whose performance had been running far too long, on far too little. You need to reverse what you've done, he said. Alton is inside, I said. We sat down. Alton placed the account statements on the coffee table, one document at a time, without comment. The fraudulent authorizations, the verified signature discrepancies, the development project ledgers, the transfer records. Brent looked at them without touching them. Financial strategy in a volatile market is complex, he began. You're misinterpreting instruments that require. Those aren't my signatures, I said. He said nothing. The authorizations submitted electronically 6 and 11 months ago. They aren't mine. You don't understand. I was a nurse for 31 years, I said. I understand documentation. He tried several more angles, righteous anger, wounded dignity. He suggested, at one point, that I had never truly accepted him, that I had always wanted to control Audra's life, that my motivations were jealousies rather than justice. Alton listened to all of it without expression. Then Audra came in from the kitchen. She had been there since she arrived. I had not told her to stay back, and she had understood. She stood in the doorway with Ivy on her hip. Audra. Brent's voice changed immediately, softened, urgent. Tell her this is a family matter. You forged my mother's name on financial documents, Audra said, quietly, clearly. You used her signature without her knowledge. He stared at her. She raised me alone after my father died. She worked nights so I had what I needed. Audra's voice didn't waver. She made a quilt from my father's shirts for our daughter, and you forged her name. Brent left the house 40 minutes later. The accounts remained frozen. The matter was filed with the appropriate authorities. Not managed away, not settled quietly between families. Alton was clear, and I agreed with him. Proper process would follow. There would be consequences, and they would be real ones. After the door closed, the house was very quiet. Audra sat down on the sofa. Ivy had fallen asleep against her chest. Outside, an ordinary Victoria evening, a neighbor walking a dog along the street, the light fading slowly over the cedar fence Alfred had built. I kept the quilt, Audra said after a while. I looked at her. From the naming ceremony. I found it under my chair after everyone had gone. I brought it home. She swallowed. I put it in Ivy's crib that same night. I hadn't known that. I think about it every day, she said, about what it must have felt like for you to carry it in and then carry it back out again. I know what I made it from, I said. That's enough. She shook her head. It isn't enough, and I know it. She looked at me directly for the first time in what felt like a very long time. I don't expect you to forgive me right now. I know that's not mine to ask for. No, I said, not right now. She nodded. She had expected that, and the fact that she didn't argue, didn't try to rush me toward a resolution that would make her feel better, before she had done the work of earning it, told me something real about where she was. Several months later, the maple at the front of the house had gone amber, and the mornings were cold enough for a proper coat. Audra came to the house on a Sunday. She had found a small apartment on the north side of the city. She had gone back to nursing, part-time at first, then more. She wasn't earning what Brent had always implied she should aspire to. She was earning something steadier than that. She came in with Ivy on her hip and a bag from the bakery on Cook Street. We sat at the kitchen table. We ate. We talked about ordinary things. Ivy's new words, a difficult shift Audra had handled with more patience than she'd expected from herself. The hydrangeas had done well this year. The cedar fence would need one more coat of paint before winter. After lunch, Audra reached into the bag she had brought and took out the quilt. Alfred's flannel, soft from washing, the seams still tight. She held it for a moment. Then she stood, walked toward me with Ivy in her arms, and placed my granddaughter in my hands. She didn't say anything. She tucked the quilt around both of us, her arms reaching around mine, the flannel warm and familiar in a way I had forgotten things could be familiar. Ivy's weight settled against my chest, small and certain. I pressed my face into the top of Ivy's head and breathed. I had imagined that moment the entire time I was making the quilt. I had imagined it so clearly I thought I knew exactly what it would feel like. I was wrong. The way you are always wrong about the moments that matter most. Nothing that real can be imagined in advance. You just have to arrive at it and let it be what it is. Audra sat back down across from me. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window. She didn't fill the silence. Some things don't need filling. I have learned things at 63 I did not expect to learn. I expected to learn patience. I expected to learn grief. I did not expect to learn that love requires a backbone. That generosity without limits is not love. It is fear wearing a more comfortable name. I gave Audra everything I had for years because I was frightened that if I ever stopped, she would no longer feel loved. And because I never allowed her to manage without me, she never had to discover what she was actually made of. She knows now. And when she calls me from the hospital parking lot after a long shift to tell me something small, that Ivy learned a new word, that the drive home was beautiful in the morning light, I hear something in her voice I don't think was there before. Not the performance of a life, the actual thing, the kind you earn by showing up for it honestly. I still have my kitchen table, the tea. The garden Alfred built the fence around. The sea wall in the morning when the mist is still rising off the water and the city is just beginning to wake. It is a quieter life than I spent many years running from, and I find I am no longer running. If any part of this story sat with you, if you have ever given too much and been made to feel it was never enough, I hope you know that taking yourself back is not cruelty. It is the beginning of something more honest than anything that came before it. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single one. You are not alone in this.